صلى الله على محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم.
Hello, reading champions. How are you doing? Are you ready to read a new story from Good Night Stories from the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Let's start reading together. The Prophet comes to Medina. It was a difficult time for the Muslims of Mecca. Their enemies troubled them all the time. They did not let them pray in peace. They abused them. Sometimes they even attacked them. So the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam told them to go to Medina, which was known as Yathrib at that time. Medina was a city some distance from Mecca. Its inhabitants had heard of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so they came to Mecca to meet him. On meeting him, they became Muslims, and they invited the Prophet ﷺ and his followers to come to Medina. They wanted them to live with them. First, the Prophet ﷺ sent his followers. He did not go himself, but waited for a sign from Allah. One day, Jibril came and told him, "Don't go to sleep tonight." The Prophet ﷺ enemies surrounded his house that night. The Prophet ﷺ saw them and told Ali, "Sleep on my bed and cover yourself with my cloak." Ali lay down on the Prophet's bed, while the Prophet ﷺ quietly left the house. The Prophet ﷺ went straight to Abu Bakr's house, where Abu Bakr had 2 camels ready for the flight. They mounted the camels and left the city. They went to a nearby mountain and hid in a cave there. They stayed in the cave for 3 days. Their enemies looked for them everywhere, but could not find them. One day, some people who were looking for them passed by the cave. They looked at the entrance of the cave, but did not go in. When they left, the Prophet ﷺ and Abu Bakr looked out. They saw a huge spider's web blocking the entrance. That is why the search party had walked by and did not bother to go in. 3 days later, the Prophet ﷺ and Abu Bakr left with a guide who took them across the desert. He took them by a route which only a few people knew, and he led them safely to Medina. Every day, the people of Medina stood outside the city. They looked towards the desert and waited for the Prophet ﷺ. They waited for many days, but he did not come. He came finally on a hot afternoon. He stopped at the shade of a palm tree, and the people greeted him. They were happy he was among them at last. The first sermon which the Prophet ﷺ gave to the people of Medina has been recorded in the books of Hadith as أول خطبة خطبها رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم في المدينة. In this sermon, the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم did not say a word against the people of Mecca, who had persecuted him and driven him out of the city. The Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم simply warned the people of Medina about hellfire and reminded them of the day of judgment, when every soul would stand in front of the Almighty to be judged and rewarded or punished according his or her deeds. And that was our story for today. Thank you for watching and see you next time, inshallah.
محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم.